when people talk about like balance, I often feel like we talk about it very much in terms of having both things at the same time. But I also think about the balance over the course of my life. This was one of the things that really impressed me when I joined ManTech, is that ManTech was adopting generative AI early, before ChatGPT captured everybody's imagination. And we have an internal tool that we use within ManTech that makes generative AI available throughout the enterprise. What I would say in terms of focusing on AI and data science and those kinds of fields that makes it a little bit different from, not from all other technical fields, but from some, and certainly from some things in computer science, is that it's fuzzier.
ManTech is more than a technology company. It's a mission-driven organization dedicated to serving the public trust. From enhancing national security to supporting veterans and advancing healthcare, ManTech's work directly impacts the safety and well-being of communities. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the DevLab Podcast, brought to you by hackajob. Today, we are joined by Dr. Kristen Summers, VP and Technical Fellow of Data and AI at ManTech. Kristen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
So, Kristen, we love to start these conversations by learning a little bit about your journey. And from my research that I was doing online, it appears that you've transitioned from academic research to roles that kind of directly impact clients. What inspired that shift? And I guess as your career's gone on, how has it shaped your approach to AI and data?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it really has been kind of a gradual shift for me, or it was. I would say I was really only doing purely academic research during my PhD, and I loved that. And when I did that, I thought, well, I'm going to go into industry and I'm going to do research there. That's the natural transition, right? And I got a job in a lab and I was doing research work there. And it was great. But also, I found that it was very motivating when we were doing things that were closer to what clients would use. So things that as an academic, I might not have thought as much about, like benchmarking the way a tool works for a particular use case, felt really gratifying when we could give people an answer and say, this is what you should use under these conditions. And then as my career progressed, as I moved out of that job into another job, I was still in an R&D group, but it was more of an applied R&D group. And what happened was I sort of gravitated towards things that were at the intersection. And I became kind of a connection point person between applied research and development activities, custom integration activities, and product development activities where I was. And what that let me do was kind of see how all these different pieces come together and how they feed into each other, and how in the ideal case, you have kind of a flywheel between these things, right? You see what your clients need. That tells you what the open questions are that it's important to research. You can help sort of get research going on that. You bring that back, whether it's into the product or into very client-specific solutions. And so what happened out of that is, as I progressed, I gravitated more and more towards focusing on the parts that are really about how to make things valuable for clients. Just seeing that immediate reaction and seeing that now somebody can do their job in a better way, I found was what motivated me, but always with those continuous sort of tiebacks to other areas.
Yeah, that's awesome. And something we end up discussing a lot on this podcast is different career paths and where people end up. And I think there's this brilliant mental model where you can have exposure to different environments and bring that together. It's often quite a unique skill set to come from a research lab and then see that in that client environment. And the way you described that intersection, I absolutely loved and makes a lot of sense in terms of how your career has progressed. And something else we love doing on this podcast is touching on some of the topics that often people in our community and people, when they're thinking about their job search, want to just get general advice on. And I think as people naturally progress through their career, there's often natural pauses or quieter periods when they're changing roles, going through life events, whatever that may be. And I'd be really intrigued to hear, have you approached this in your career? Have you had some of these natural pauses? And what perspective would you share with others who are listening today that, might be navigating similar times in their career?
Yeah, I love that question because when people ask me about my career path, that's something that it's sort of really important to me to focus on and talk about a little bit. I did have a fairly lengthy quiet period that was really good for me. I had other things going on in my personal life. I had a small child and I was very focused on her. And that was what I wanted to do. I didn't take significant time out from the workforce, but I was very comfortable in that time continuing to do the job that I had been doing, not looking for new stretch assignments, not looking to learn about a whole new field, doing the things that I was doing them well and keeping a balance. Like when people talk about like balance, I often feel like we talk about it very much in terms of having both things at the same time. But I also think about the balance over the course of my life. So in my early career, I was super work focused. I had a lot of time and energy for that. And then, yeah, I had more focus on family and my career was quieter. It was sort of in a steady state. That was great. I did interesting things. Other people were branching out in other ways. That wasn't where my head was right then. And then as my daughter got older, I had more energy, kind of, she was a little more independent, and I had a little more energy to put back into my career. And I was thinking again about things, interesting problems I wanted to solve, and the next thing I wanted to do. And that has worked really well for me and allowed me to kind of get that balance throughout my life in the ways that I'm looking for it. And I think the advice that I would give to people is, I know it sounds really simplistic, but to be where you are and that it's okay. There isn't any single path that you need to get to. I had a professor in college, he was talking about something completely different, but he always used the metaphor of a mountain. And if you're trying to get to the top of a mountain, there are a lot of different roads to get there. It was sort of his explanation of why he might show us several different ways of approaching the same problem, like whichever one works for you. And the analogy isn't precise because we aren't even all trying to get to the same top of the same mountain or anything like that. But I think about that sometimes in that there are lots of paths. They don't all look the same and they're not going to all have the same waypoints. And so rather than thinking like, oh, somebody I started school with is now doing this other thing and branching out more or taking leadership responsibility. And should I be doing that too? If those things are right for you later, you can still do them later. They don't disappear.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I think it's so powerful for people listening to somebody like yourself who has achieved so much in their career and just being really vulnerable and honest about how you've navigated that in your career path. And it's cliche to say, but we all are running our own race. And, as much as we can stick to that, it reminds me a little bit of a quote that I heard from Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan. And he said, you can have it all in life, just maybe not all at the same time. And the way you describe those different phases of your life and how you index the different things during that is brilliant. And I'm sure very inspiring and also just very practical for people listening to the show as well, which is brilliant. So that career trajectory and those different focuses has led you to this role at ManTech. And we've had the pleasure of partnering with ManTech for a while now. So we've got some idea of what we do, but some people listening maybe don't. So we'd love to learn a little bit more about your role and remit at ManTech. What really excites you about leading their data and AI practices?
Yeah, so our data and AI practice is fairly new, and that is in itself exciting. I lead the technical side of the practice. I have a counterpart who leads the business and consulting side, and then, there's a lead of the practice overall. And I really joined because I was moved by the vision of the overall practice lead, who sort of showed me that we have an opportunity to make data and AI real for our clients in a way that is both really scientifically grounded. I come back to my early days in research and the way I feel like that is important to bring to bear, and that grounding in science and R&D is important to bring to bear with our clients. That is both that and really practical and focused on our clients' needs. So we're meeting them where they are. We're leading with consulting, really, and understanding, what do you have today? What do you need? What is the pain point? What is your appetite for changing various kinds of things? And then bringing to that, okay, knowing that and having a grounding in the technology, both as it's used and the underlying science that tells you, where can I stretch this? Where can I move it? Where can I do it in different ways? Where will I be sort of going out on a limb? We can bring them the solution that really makes sense and fits into what they're doing. And being able to sort of build that vision and that integration of those different pieces has been super exciting to me. ManTech is totally committed to AI, which has been super exciting to me. It's super fun to be here and be able to talk to clients about all of the things that they want to do, and to know that, we're in it with them all the way to use AI for practical purposes. Not it's a fun toy. I'm not going to deny that there are awesome toys that AI enables, but it's also an incredible enabler of meaningful work.
I love that description of it being a fun toy, because it definitely can be. And that can be like the biggest distraction of it all. But actually, as your point and what you said there at the end was that this can be a real practical enabler of work. And it sounds like this mesh of really deeply understanding the client need and where they're at, and that kind of R&D process again kind of joins a lot of your experience together into a single role, which is incredible. Something we often talk about on this show, and something that we talk about more broadly, is what is it like being a woman in the technology landscape, and especially as it relates to data and AI. And often these are very male-led fields, and I'm sure there's been many parts in your career where you've been the only woman in the room, and I'm sure that can bring unique challenges and potentially opportunities too. So again, to the people listening today that are really inspired by your career journey, I would love you to just talk to that experience that you've had as being an incredible female leader in the technology sector.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it has absolutely been both a challenge in many cases, and I don't want to sort of sugarcoat that, and also an opportunity in some. What I found, and I can't remember where I first read something that pointed this out. I don't want to take credit for the observation, but I can't remember who to cite. But what I found is that it makes me noticeable and memorable simply because I'm the only woman in the room. So, or if there's two of us, we both are, both for better and for worse. So if I say something that people don't like, they probably remember it for longer than they do someone who blended in more. And if I say something that they do like, they probably remember it for longer than somebody who blends in more with the crowd. It just sort of creates this difference that people do attend to. There've definitely been times when it also affects, the sense of like, how easy it is to be part of the group. That is a thing that happens. But it's also true that most of the people that I've interacted with, once they recognize that you have qualifications and ideas, they respond to that. It's more about the beginning, right? It's more about when they don't know anybody and you're more memorable because you're unknown. And depending on whether they like what you say, that may be a positive or a negative. And also maybe about initial expectations. I've definitely had people assume that I was in a non-technical role, not so much assume that I was in a lower status role, but that it was a non-technical role. And so I have learned a little bit to lead with sometimes extra technical language more so than I otherwise would, just to sort of get that out on the table. But I've usually found that once that's established and once, there is kind of an exchange of ideas, these other things become much less important.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing. And it's, I've got a lot of respect and appreciation for you to come on for platforms like this and tell your story, because it really is truly inspiring to people in the industry. And I feel like one of the things that we have to do to move the needle when it comes to creating a more diverse tech workforce is share the success stories and have role models for people to look up to. And you talked about once people appreciate the fact you've got the qualifications to do the role, we move past that. And it's safe to say there aren't many people that have your level and sophistication of qualifications and skill sets to lead an AI and data practice. And, I'm sure that comes across pretty quickly in the conversations that people end up having with you. So as you thought about this kind of new leadership role at ManTech and running this new practice, what do you believe are kind of some of those skills, those qualities that have been really essential in guiding ManTech's AI practice, especially given this explosion of AI excitement over the last couple of years?
Yeah. So, given the recent explosion, I'm going to say what everybody says in answers to those questions first, which is flexibility and curiosity, right? That things are changing very quickly, and you need to be both able to kind of adapt to that and be responsive to it in a positive way. Like, oh, let's learn about that new thing and let's try this other thing. Having said that, I do think that it's valuable to have a significant history of working in data science and AI behind me. Not that absolutely everybody in the practice needs to have that, but having some presence of that history means I've seen some of these cycles of rapid change before. I'm kind of used to how they go. Recognize where some of the pitfalls have been in the past, which may be different now, but it does give you some sense of what to look for and be concerned about. And it also creates a grounding in what all of these new advances are based on, right? Because everything builds on what came before. And I know that in a lot of the sort of broad consciousness, AI seemed to just emerge on the scene suddenly a couple of years ago. But it's a long field with a long history, and there have been a lot of parts of it and a lot of kinds of it. And understanding that basis and those foundations make it easier to adapt to all of the current changes because they all build on each other and they're all incremental. So it sort of creates that. That's one part of it. There's another part of it that's more about the practice itself and how we go to clients, right? So having had experience, always coming back to this, having had experience working in an R&D environment, working directly with clients, working behind the scenes to develop things that go into products helps to create a practice that blends both the underpinnings and the R&D with meeting clients where they are and to kind of understand what the perspectives are going to be of both of those things. And I'll say this bluntly too, having some bruises from past experiences with AI and data science is super helpful. Having been on some projects where I could see how things play out, there's all these statistics that float around about how many data science and AI projects fail in some sense of the word fail or don't go to production, which I would argue that's not necessarily always a failure. Perhaps sometimes you learned from an experiment and something else went to production. But regardless, a huge percentage of things don't get all the way there. And having had some of those experiences directly and having this sort of almost muscle memory of what are the kinds of things that can go wrong is very helpful in setting up structures to try to address that early on. Nothing's 100% guarantee, but I do think we have some good methods for making sure that we are addressing some of the common issues that we're building things that people will really use.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. And I mean, going back to where you started talking about the kind of speed of change and that flexibility, I don't think I've used the phrase more. I've changed my mind on that. Or I used to think more so than I've done in this last kind of 18-month period. It's been amazing to see how much things have evolved and changed. But to your point, and it's fascinating when I'll discuss like AI with my parents, it's like they think that this is this new concept that's just come to market. And it's like, oh, like actually, this has been going on for, almost a century now, 70, 80 years of research that's led us to this point. But I guess it is this topic of generative AI that has really captured the imagination with ChatGPT and everything that's come since. And I'd love for you to talk to how ManTech's early internal adoption of some of that generative AI technology shaped some of the company's overall approach to AI.
This was one of the things that really impressed me when I joined ManTech. Is that ManTech was adopting generative AI early, before ChatGPT captured everybody's imagination. And we have an internal tool that we use within ManTech that makes generative AI available throughout the enterprise. And that does a few things. So it's not that we've built our own foundation model. Sometimes people sort of conflate those things. It calls out to existing foundation models, but it's an adoption and it has a bunch of prompt engineering around various personas. And actually now we also have some agentic workflows. So we keep adding things as they become practices and tools that are available within generative AI. And one of the things that it's done is exposed ManTech at large to AI. So, people can think about how they might use it in their own work and with their clients. One of the things that it's done is given us grounding in use cases that work very well and that can be replicated easily. I think everybody knows by now that Code Assist is a great use case for generative AI, right? Coding is so much easier with it. Conventional, sort of simple question answering, fantastic. Question answering against your own data with retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. We have that. We're using it internally. People get very comfortable with it. There are a lot of cases for that. But also things that are more complex now, and that involves, doing these agentic workflows. Some members of our proposal team have been using things like that to help with their proposals. That's one that doesn't translate as directly to our clients, but it's sort of an interesting way for us to experiment with things, right? But also we have some things we're starting to put together that would reflect use cases that might be more useful to our clients, sort of generalizing from that kind of work into more broadly, pulling together your information from different sources into the ways that you want it to be. And those kinds of things, and things that are even more behind the scenes. One of the things that we look to do is ask the question, how far to the left in your own workflow can you bring the use of AI? Rather than sort of waiting for the end and then chatting with your data, that's one really good use case. But there are a bunch of interesting use cases that happen before you're at that point. And so it gives us a chance to try those things out and experiment with them and see what's really going to help. And it's also a reference architecture that we can bring to our clients. And so we can get up and running very quickly for specific use cases for them.
Okay, this is one of the things I love about this show is I just get my mind blown. And this is too interesting not to just go deep on. So we're going to go slightly off script. I'm sorry.
Okay.
We will come back to the script, but this is fascinating to me on so many levels. I think a lot of companies are really scared of AI. And actually are like, oh, like we need to put a load of controls in place. And, we don't want to just open it up to our team. And, arguably Microsoft's done a really good job with Copilot and de-risking some of this stuff and deeply understanding the enterprise. Was there any fear, reluctance internally to really open up some of these tools and kind of encourage the kind of use of them more broadly? And how have you taken, I guess, the more non-technical employees at ManTech on the journey of interacting with some of these tools?
Yeah, so I'm sure there was some resistance, but by the time I joined, this internal tool existed and it was being rolled out. So I can't really speak to how that was managed. And I will say at the very top, we have significant commitment to AI. And ManTech has a philosophy of proven here first to the extent that we can. Not all of our use cases are the same, and I want to acknowledge that, but try the things and walk the walk that we're talking to our clients is the way I would describe it. And so that creates an environment that's much more ready to embrace something like this because we want to bring it to our clients and they're asking for it. So we should be trying to do it too. It is absolutely true that there are concerns and there are legitimate concerns about when to use AI and when not to. And one of the things that I see as the role of the AI practice is to help people understand what those guardrails can look like and what are good uses and what are problematic uses and what are maybe in between, right? Some of it is just breaking down some of the myths. So there are a number of different ways to access generative AI, right? And if you're not a specialist in it, there's no reason you should be a specialist in the implications of these different kinds of access. But some of them will store the data from your interaction and use it to retrain. And that means that you're opening up that data. Some will not. So we're working within, a private tenant in the cloud with an application that will not store that. And so we can sort of put some of those fears to rest in a way that, it's just a matter of sort of both making it clear that this is safe and also that people are right to be worried. It's not necessarily the same thing if they go to every commercial tool that's using generative AI, right? So that's another reason to have an internal tool like we do, because there is always a risk if you don't give people the right way to do something that's as appealing and shiny as generative AI has been, that they'll go do it the wrong way and that then your data will be out there. So better to kind of take that and redirect all of that good energy into something that's safe. We also do, though, take very seriously the guardrails that need to be on this. Most of the uses that we have internally don't lead to some of the concerns about things like toxic content very much, but we do watch for that for sure and pay attention to those concerns. And also to things like the need to vet what comes back. So we can address that in a variety of ways, right? For a specific use case that we want to serve consistently and over time, we may build in some guardrails and workflows that include some of that checking. For the sort of open-ended use of the system, go chat with it, chat with your documents, do rag yourself. It's more a matter of recommending to people, making sure they're aware that they should double check what's coming back, and giving them sample prompts and also pre-built personas that they can use that include in the prompt some of the things that cause it to provide reasoning, which you should then read, right? Because the reasoning may or may not be correct, but it gives you the basis to respond to it. When I talk about moving AI farther to the left in your own workflow, that creates an interesting variation, right? Because at that point, you may be doing things that are a little bit behind the scenes, but then you want to surface the results of that in a way that tells the user, here's the basis for it, and you should validate it, or here's the part that you need to validate. So then those aspects become almost as much about user experience design as they do about the AI. And so it's important to us to kind of bring those things together.
Yeah, I love it. There's a couple of things that you've said that really stick with me. Firstly, I love ManTech's wider philosophy of proven here first. I feel like if you're going to be a consultancy, if you're going to go and work with clients, it's brilliant to be able to show this. But this mental model of how far to the left in your workflow can you bring these tools, I love. I haven't heard it described like that before. And I think, again, I think a lot in AI and a lot of the mental models that you can try and apply to, and often changing my mind on mental models as you learn more. And that's a brilliant one. Something that you touched on, which I'm really excited about as these models continue to develop, are these more complex agentic workflows. And would love to just hear either specifically internally or just more broadly your view on agentic workflows and again, the future of AI and what's exciting you. What are some of the papers or products or services out there that's getting you excited?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are doing a lot of work developing agentic workflows right now. I'm sort of hesitating to name specific things because they're not rolled out, but that is absolutely where our heads are right now. And I think that that's actually indicative of what I see as kind of what feels like the next step to me, which is that The foundation models have become incredibly powerful and they can do amazing things. And there's a lot of sort of next step catch up to be done in how they're integrated and used with other techniques and other things. So the agentic workflows aren't changing what your sort of core AI model can do, right? But they're changing how you use it because you are asking it to sort of take on different personas and do different things and you're orchestrating that and maybe you're orchestrating that maybe you're being bold and letting the AI orchestrate that. You can go in different directions. And we're sort of playing with both of those cases for different purposes. I think that's one really strong example, and it's one that we're working with right now. Another thing that excites me is the combination of more conventional AI methods with the foundation models. And not everybody is thinking this way, but there is a lot of work around combining with various kinds of knowledge representation, things that fall in that category around things like using knowledge graphs, right, in combination with your generative AI model. And you can do that in both directions, right? The generative AI can help you create your knowledge graph and maintain it. And your knowledge graph can help you sort of guide your generative AI to doing the right things or providing it with the right information. So I think, from that perspective, one way to look at that is that RAG was a first step towards getting the right information in front of your model. But there are a lot of other things you can do around that. And then, some of the use cases we're looking at right now kind of lend themselves to doing more conventional machine learning for a part of the task and combining that with generative AI for interpreting the results of that or, bringing it to the user and interacting with it. So you may want to cluster your data. You may just want to cluster it for various reasons, right? But then you may want to ask a lot of natural free flowing questions about the information in that cluster. And so bringing those things together and then maybe I have a knowledge graph that informs how I interpret the things that are in that cluster, whatever the things may be. I think those kinds of combinations are where I'm seeing a lot of energy and potential next. And then I don't even want to try to predict what comes after that. Like things could go in any direction.
Yeah, it's more impossible than it ever has been to predict the future. And I love the example of knowledge graph because it's something that we've actually spent a lot of time at hackajob thinking about. And when you can combine these techniques together, it's really interesting. And so we've created a knowledge graph of all of the various technical skills and company data and everything we have when we think about matching talent to jobs. But then we can use some of the generative AI to do some like real life explaining around what a specific skill may be that you may not know. So the knowledge graph, yes, great, helps with matching, but the Gen AI helps with the explainability piece. And when you can bring these two things together, it's like really, really exciting and really interesting. And yeah, I mean, the agentic workflows are fascinating. And yeah, brave to let the AI dictate which agentic workflows are going to get triggered, but feels like that, is a natural next step. Coming back to something that you said earlier, and I loved your framing on it, is, there was a perception that a lot of AI or data science projects fail. And I think you reframed that to actually, maybe they just don't get to production scale. And I think that's also what's been really interesting over the last 12 to 18 months is these models have just got faster and cheaper at such a rate that what might not have been possible from a production level idea 6 months ago may now quite possibly be. So in this rapidly changing environment, and I guess over the course of your career, how do you think about evaluating and defining success in an AI or data, led project over time?
Yeah, I think there are a few ways to define that success. Absolutely. And I would start with the simplest, which is, did the client get what they need? Is it helping them do their job? Like in most cases where you're doing something client facing, that's the real metric for success. And you can kind of back off from that to other things that are components of it or that give you something numeric if you want, right? Because the thing that I just described is sort of qualitative. There's a binary aspect, are they using it at all? And then there's a qualitative aspect, how helpful is it to them? But you can look at that in terms of, did it get to production? You can look at that in terms of, is it adopted? Is it, is people's work in a qualitative way or on some scale faster, easier, more pleasant? Sometimes, it's just improving the quality of life for people. Ideally, it's also taking something off their plate so that they can work on the harder problems. Sometimes people say they worry about AI taking jobs away. I have yet to see a situation where we're not talking with someone whose end users are already overloaded. So if this helps them to do one thing, it gives them the opportunity to use their brain power to do something else that they also need to do. So those are the things I look for in sort of the end state. But I think you build up to that in other ways as well, right? So I also evaluate how well did the AI do the defined task? And I distinguish that from success of the system as a whole. So your AI may do a fantastic job of summarizing documents that come in. But if it turns out, and say, I don't know, maybe you frame the task as documents are coming in, summarize each one to one paragraph. And it may do a fantastic job of that. But if it turns out that one paragraph summaries are not useful to people in their workflow, then the whole project didn't succeed, right? Or if your AI, to sort of harken back to, more old-fashioned tasks, but they're still relevant. If your AI does a great job of entity recognition and it's finding people, places, things, that sort of thing in text that's coming through, or object detection. Let's make it vision. I don't, all my examples don't have to be language. And it's doing a great job of detecting different objects and images that you pointed at. But maybe it's not so good at assigning a confidence score. Like overall, its accuracy is really good, but maybe the confidence score isn't a very good indicator of which ones are accurate. If what that means is that the next step that's consuming it, maybe in an automated workflow, is not able to use it because it doesn't really know which ones are likely to be right. And so it relies too heavily on the output, or it's slowed down because it has to do a whole bunch of double checking or something like that, then the whole system is not as successful as you would like it to be, even though the AI part did its defined job well. So it's important to do that evaluation. It's important to do all of these very specific assessments we do of accuracy, of precision and recall for things that are like that. For problem sets is the word I was trying to look for, use cases that lend themselves to that. Or other metrics where it's not strict accuracy, but it's not precision and recall. If you look at like machine translation, you have measures like blue and rouge. Those are all really important. And also, it's an and, not an or, in my view, right? And also, we have to be looking at whether the system completes everything that it needs to, whether it serves the purpose that it needs to serve, and how well it's doing that. And then I would back it all the way up, right? And that was kind of the reframing I was doing. There's also a form of success that's learning what you need for next time. And that's usually more a success for an IRAD project than it is for a client facing, or I should say for a production style client facing project. Sometimes clients also want to do R&D work, and that's totally legit. If you're in that space of exploring the art of the possible, then sometimes success is we have a clear outcome. We understand more about what's possible or what the constraints are or what solutions are better under what conditions. And that's something where, again, sort of coming back to this blending, like those are things we need to do in order to maximize the success in terms of getting the client out, the outcome you want for the client, and having the system do the thing it needs to do when you do those other kinds of projects.
What a brilliant answer. Oh my, there are so many areas I want to dig into, but I love the way you framed this idea around the AI might do really well at the defined task, but if it didn't solve the user's problem, it doesn't really matter. And I get asked by customers, etc., like, how should we think about evaluating AI products? And I say, remove the word AI, come back to the problem that you solve, and does it solve the problem you're looking to solve? And I hate quoting Steve Jobs, but there was this one quote that he said, which I think really encapsulates this. And I use this as a contrast for like Web3 and crypto, which is the end consumer doesn't care about the technology you use to solve their problem. They just want their problem solved 10 times better than what it was before. And that's where I think that some of this involvement in AI and generative AI and agentic AI is really exciting, because you do have this paradigm shift in technology, but it can solve problems in new ways, in 10x ways than what it was done before. And the way you reframed, yeah, this isn't failure. This is about learning what we do next time is just brilliant. I feel energized after a conversation today, Kristen. It's been so much fun. Before I let you leave, I would love to just maybe go back to a little bit where we started and go to a little bit of advice corner. And for those people that are listening to the podcast today that are feeling really inspired, there's no doubt that AI is probably the most exciting field right now, and a lot of people retraining into that field or maybe recent graduates entering that field. How would you think about advising somebody at the start of their AI journey? What skills or experiences would you recommend they focus on to be impactful in roles like yours and to have, a really distinguished career in AI?
Yeah, this is another one where I have to start by saying the thing that everybody does, which is, again, flexibility and curiosity. Things are changing fast. You're going to be, learning and relearning all the time. And being able to go with that and being inclined to go with that is going to be really important. But the other things that I would say are, like, if you're starting in your career in AI, you probably you have some education, right, in AI, and probably in computer science and software development development, if you're sort of on the technical side, probably. And I would say all of those things are really important. And what I would say in terms of focusing on AI and data science and those kinds of fields that makes it a little bit different from, not from all other technical fields, but from some, and certainly from some things in computer science, is that it's fuzzier. And so when we were talking about what constitutes success and how you measure that, that tends to look different. And I say this as somebody who was originally attracted to computer science because it was applied logic and it was crisp, and either the thing works or it doesn't. And now all I spend my time doing is stuff that's either statistical or heuristic, right? Virtually all the time. One of the things that means is that you have to find a way to evaluate that. So what it looks like to evaluate whether it's correct has a different flavor from the way you test each path in a program, but once you've done that, that you know that it works correctly. In these cases, especially with the new foundation models where it's so opaque what's going on inside, you need to have more of a test plan that focuses on your data and giving it a variety of kinds of problems and kinds of data so that you know what you can expect, both how well it's doing overall and under what conditions you expect it to do well and poorly. Having the kind of statistical mindset and thinking about that distribution and thinking about sort of the ways of getting at that, even when you're just talking about, hey, does the thing work well enough, I think is a really important aspect. And the other thing that I would say, at least for roles like mine, and this depends on what role you're in, people do very different things, the client-centric aspect of it is also really important. Being focused on the human part of the problem. And I will say, I actually was just having a conversation with some folks at work about this, I don't know, earlier this week. It really was a light bulb moment for me early in my career when suddenly I stopped thinking about all of the programmatic questions and human need questions and change management and how people will adopt them. I stopped thinking of that as the extra stuff around the technical problem and started thinking of all of that as the problem space, right? And being able to think about it in that way and say, I need to bring these things together. That's important for this kind of role. There are other roles that are all about one or all about the other, and they're important too. So my other, maybe my bigger piece of advice is like similar to the kind of be where you are in your career path is like, there are so many things to do in this field. Find the one that works for you. If it's all about coding and integrating AI, do that. If it's all about you want to build the next thing that's going to be, the next foundation model or the next thing that's going to be on top of that, do that. If it's all about, how do you get these things to behave the way you want to, do that. And there are so many, and that's just a few. If it's all about what are the guardrails we need in order to be able to trust this in different environments? Again, those are just a few examples, but find the piece of it that's right for you and do that piece.
I love it. I love it. Coming back to the thing that everyone's talking about, flexibility and curiosity is probably the most employable skill that we could all have over the next decade. But success looking fuzzier in the AI data world versus kind of that applied logic comp sci world is another mental model that's really gonna stick with me. Dr. Kristen Summers, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I know we've gone over a little bit on time, so incredibly grateful. If people want to connect with you, learn more about you, is there any social media that you're active on? Is there any way you would encourage them to go and check out more about yourself, the practice, or ManTech more broadly?
Sure. So I would start with ManTech. So our ManTech website has an AI page that has information about the practice and bios for me and the other leaders in the practice. And there is a link right there where you can email us. So if you want to get in touch specifically about our practice, do that. But I am also active on LinkedIn, so happy to have people reach out there as well.
Amazing. Dr. Kristen Summers, thank you so much for coming on today's show. Massively appreciate it and look forward to speaking again soon.
Thank you so much. This was really fun. Thank you for having me.